And if you need a quarterly, Barry has some. If you'll raise your hand, he'll get you one. This quarter, we're studying the book of Daniel, if you're new to the class. And before we start talking about Daniel, however, I want us to read the Beatitudes. And I'll show you why. I think why. My grandfather, I'm told, I never knew my grandfathers, either one of them, but one of my grandfathers, I'm told, was a part-time preacher. And my mother says that he made a point to never express opinion when he was preaching. And I sure don't do that when I'm teaching. So my opinion is, I'm getting over here to tell you my opinion. My opinion, a lot of this book, what I've gotten out of this book as we've been studying anyway, and a lot of these lessons, is about pride. The dangers of pride and the attitude that we ought to have instead of pride. Humble, meek, lowly, those kind of things. So that's why I want to start this morning by reading Matthew 5, verses 3 through 12. Now, I know that Edward's studying Matthew on Wednesday night, so in 3 or 4 weeks we're going to go through these verses very carefully, and he's going to do a lot better job. But I just want you to notice as we go through them the characteristics of Daniel. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are the gentle, for they shall inherit the earth. As I'm reading through Daniel, I see him being gentle. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be satisfied. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God. Blessed are those who have been persecuted for the sake of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Goodness knows Daniel was persecuted a lot in his short time there in Babylon. Blessed are those when people insult you and persecute you and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward in heaven is great. For in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you. So, I want us to kind of keep those in the back of our mind as we go through all these studies of Daniel and the things that he and his brethren went through as being slaves and captives in Babylon and later for the Medes and Persians. Again, one of the big lessons I see as we read through this is the danger of pride, the evil of pride, and the goal that we ought to have to be humble. In fact, goal is not even the right word. That's not strong enough. We're exhorted, we're commanded over and over to be humble and meek. Not weak, but meek. There's a huge difference. Being willing to stand up for God, but doing it lovingly and not with arrogance, as sometimes we come across, I'm afraid, as being arrogant in our religious situations. We're warned again and again of the dangers of pride. Now, last week Jackie led us in the study of the party, for lack of a better term, that the Babylonians, Belshazzar, in fact, had thrown for he and his buddies. And during this party, he sends some of his lackeys down to the old storage shed and says, bring those vessels that we got out of the temple down in Jerusalem, and we'll drink out of them. They profaned the worship vessels and brought some pretty big condemnation down on themselves by doing this. And we left off last week with a hand appearing on the wall, writing something on the wall. Belshazzar sends for his wise men and astrologers. It sounds a whole lot like the lesson we studied back when Nebuchadnezzar had the dream. But he sends for the wise men and the astrologers. They can't tell him, the way I read it, they can't even tell him what the writing says. But if they can tell what it says, at least they cannot explain to him what it means. So, some female in the court It refers to her as the queen, but it's probably not Nebuchadnezzar's wife, and doesn't look like it is Belshazzar's mother. I'm not sure. But anyway, some lady that they refer to as the queen says, hey, I remember when old Nebuchadnezzar had trouble, he sent for Daniel, and Daniel was able to interpret the dream. So they do the same thing. So that's where we're picking up this morning. If you look at page 52 in the quarterly, or if you want to read it out of your Bible, it's Daniel 5, 13 through 31. Then Daniel was brought in before the king. The king spoke and said to Daniel, are you that Daniel who is one of the captives from Judah, whom my father the king brought from Judah? Now, even though this is only a couple of chapters after the dream with Nebuchadnezzar and all that, a lot of time has passed. Maybe nearly a whole generation. So Daniel is an older man now, or you would think he is. So time has passed. I have heard of you that the Spirit of God is in you, and that the light and understanding and excellent wisdom are found in you. Now the wise men, the astrologers, have been brought in before me, that they should read this writing and make known to me its interpretation. But they could not give the interpretation of the thing. And I have heard of you that you can give interpretations and explain enigmas. Now if you can read the writing and make known to me its interpretation, you shall be clothed with purple and have a chain of gold around your neck, and shall be the third ruler in the kingdom. Now I'm not sure if this means he'll be third in command, in the chain of command, or if he's going to be equal with this cat, Belshazzar, because there's another guy whose name I can't begin to pronounce, Nabonius or something, who is a co-king or a co-leader of some kind. But at the very least, he's going to be high up in the political realm. But if you'll remember, 4 weeks ago, I taught the interpretation of the dream for Nebuchadnezzar, and we saw then that he was supposed to get all this stuff from Nebuchadnezzar for being able to interpret the dream. So here goes Daniel's response, verse 17. Then Daniel answered and said before the king, let your gifts be for yourself, and give your rewards to another. Yet I will read the writing to the king and make known to him the interpretation. O king, the Most High God gave Nebuchadnezzar your father a kingdom and majesty and glory and honor. Now look what he said. It wasn't Nebuchadnezzar's wisdom or his strength or whatever that got Nebuchadnezzar a kingdom. God gave it to him. Verse 19, and because of the majesty that he gave him, all peoples, nations, and languages trembled and feared before him. Whomever he wished, he executed. Whomever he wished, he kept alive. Whomever he wished, he set up. And whomever he wished, he put down. But when his heart was lifted up and his spirit was hardened in pride, he was deposed from his kingly throne, and they took his glory from him. Now we've skipped in our studies the last part of chapter 4. But in that part, Nebuchadnezzar goes nuts, loses his mind, literally. So much that he's living out in the fields and he's munching on grass just like a cow. Or less miles. Either way, Andy, he's munching on grass. Verse 21. Then he was driven from the sons of men. His heart was made like beasts, and his dwelling was with the wild donkeys. They fed him with grass like oxen, and his body was wet with the dew of heaven, till he knew that the Most High God rules in the kingdom of men and appoints over it whomever he chooses. So, to finish up the end of chapter 4, finally, after Nebuchadnezzar has served his time out in the field eating like a beast, he comes to his senses and gets to come back and be the king a little longer, where he messes up again, goes and tries to attack Egypt and dies. But anyhow, verse 22, but you, his son, and there's a big debate whether this is really his son or a grandson or a nephew, but either way, he's an offspring of some kind. But you, his son Belshazzar, have not humbled your heart, although you knew all this. And you have lifted yourself up against the Lord of heaven. They have brought the vessels of his house before you, and you and your lords, your wives, and your concubines have drunk wine from them. And you have praised the gods of silver and gold, bronze and iron, wood and stone, which you do not see or hear or know, and the God who holds your breath in his hand and owns all your ways you have not glorified. This lesson goes with the lesson Edward taught this morning about who owns this world. Do we own it? We think we own our own small part of it, where we live, the things we've saved up, but the truth is it's all God's. The cattle on 1,000 hills, blah, blah, blah. That's what he's saying to him here. Then the fingers of the hand were sent from him, and this writing was written. And this is the inscription that was written. Mene, mene, tekel, upharsin. This is the interpretation of each word. Meaning, God has numbered your kingdom and finished it. Tekel, you have been weighed in the balances and found wanting. Perez, your kingdom has been divided and given to the Medes and Persians. Then Belshazzar gave the command, and they clothed Daniel with purple and put a chain of gold around his neck and made a proclamation concerning him that he should be the third ruler in the kingdom. Now, before we go on, I want you to think about something. We're not going to talk about it right now, but I hope we'll get to it. If you had just been told that you were going to be killed soon, you had been judged and not judged well, and your kingdom was going to be taken from you, would you have gone ahead and given him the rewards and all that you'd promised him? Think about why he did that. That very night, verse 30, that very night, Belshazzar, king of the Chaldeans, was slain, and Darius the Mede received the kingdom, being about 62 years old. All right. Just like the event we studied in chapter 2, Daniel's called when the wise men are unable to come up with this interpretation. Just like in chapter 4, Daniel revealed God's intention to punish the powerful king, and he was brave enough, strong enough, had the spine, however you want to put it, to point out to the king the prideful way he was living and the self-centered manner. And we've already talked about it in the case of Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar is driven into the field to live in the fields as a beast. And in verse 37 of chapter 4, I didn't read this a minute ago, but this was the thing I wanted you to see out of Nebuchadnezzar going nuts. When he gets through being nuts and comes to his senses, he says in verse 37, Now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise, exalt, and honor the King of heaven, for all his works are true, and his ways just, and he is able to humble those who walk in pride. Now I didn't write it down, didn't write down the verse, but back in the first situation when Nebuchadnezzar's dream was interpreted, he says a lot of the same things. He points out to Daniel, or admits to Daniel, confesses to Daniel, however you want to say it, that God is everything. He's the creator of all. So that's at least twice that Nebuchadnezzar at least paid lip service to the power of God. Now, he didn't live afterward, after saying this, like God was in charge of everything. But at least he made the comments, and kind of like a lot of people today, they're good about saying the right thing, but they don't follow through with their lives. And if we're not careful, we'll fall into that. Now, Belshazzar, the king we're studying today, his situation is worse than Nebuchadnezzar. And I think this is another lesson that we need to learn, that sometimes the benefit of education, it's a two-edged sword. The fact that Belshazzar knew what Nebuchadnezzar had been through, and he saw that God was in charge and God could be in control, and yet he ignored that, and in fact, again, profaned the vessels that he had brought from Jerusalem. His sin was worse. And we today, the more we know and the more we ignore what we know, the more guilty we are. So education comes with a responsibility, that type of thing. If anything, this passage that we've just read reminds us that God is aware of the dealings of humanity. And this is the lesson that we need to take, or a lesson that we need to take. He knows what's going on. We think we can go into our closet and hide from other people. But the truth is, God knows we're in the closet. God knows what's going on. He knew that Belshazzar was living this prideful life, and that he was throwing this party for his friends and showing up God, or showing up the Israelites, and because of that it was reflecting on God. Sir? Go back to the Edwards lesson on Wednesday night about where the devil was tempting tempting Christ. He could quote Scripture as well as Christ could. The devils know. We talked. He mentioned today they believe in the demons believed and trembled. We've got to study every chance we get to fight that. And because of that, what we learn, hopefully we follow through on and so on. Excuse the expression, but the handwriting on the wall, literally that's probably where this term came from. But the handwriting on the wall emphasized God's power and His awareness. Old Belshazzar, he was having a big time. He was in charge of the kingdom. He could throw these parties. He didn't have to work. He just had all these people running around serving him. Until all of a sudden this hand appears out of nowhere and handwriting on the wall. And kind of put an end to the party. Like Nebuchadnezzar before him, Belshazzar learned that the Most High rules in the kingdoms of men and gives it to whomever He chooses. Daniel 4:32. We've got to remember as we study through this that the Israelites, the Jews, were God's chosen people. Now they had drifted further and further away from God with their idols, or actually the idols of their women friends, or the nations around them, or the countries that they did not drive out of Canaan like they were told to. Because of that, God had used Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonians to take them over and to punish them, but God was still in control. Now from Nebuchadnezzar's side of this thing, he thought, I'm a powerful king. There isn't any God that's got anything to do with it. I'm the one that's in control, and I've taken them over. But we saw, again, chapter 4, Nebuchadnezzar gets driven out. Belshazzar takes over. Before this lesson's over, we're going to see Belshazzar killed, and in comes Cyrus. A whole other kingdom takes them over. All because God sets them up and knocks them down. Now, quickly, let's talk about the note. Let's make a note, at least, of Daniel's response to being called to read the message and his attitude toward being offered this reward. He told Belshazzar that he would read the writing. At least he didn't take the studs and say, look, Belshazzar, you've lived this kind of life. You've treated my people wrong. I'm not going to do this. Instead, in verse 17, he tells him, I'm going to read it. But you can keep your rewards. I don't want to be the third in command. I don't want your purple coat. I don't want your crown. Then in verse 22, he points out the fault of Belshazzar, and this is where the bravery comes in. Belshazzar could have gone crazy and just had his head lopped off right then. But Daniel has the fortitude to speak up and say, look, you're living wrong. I know it and you know it. So he points out that his mistakes are even worse than Nebuchadnezzar's because he should have learned from the problems that Nebuchadnezzar had. So, to get to the message, Daniel tells the king that this Mene, I hope I'm pronouncing it right, M-E-N-E, meant that God had numbered the days. This kingdom, this city, basically is about to be destroyed. The second word, and this is the one that I think applies to us more than the other, tekel. Basically what he's telling him is that Belshazzar has been weighed, he's been looked at, we would say today, he's been judged, and he's been found wanting. And the reason I think that's important to us today is everybody in this room is going to be judged. It's coming to us at one point or another, and we're going to be reminded of the things we did that maybe that nobody else knew. Maybe my neighbor didn't know I did this, or maybe even my spouse didn't know I did that, or I had those thoughts. But we're going to be reminded. And in Belshazzar's case, it says that he came up being found wanting. In other words, he didn't do all he was supposed to do. He came up short. The third word, Perez, was God's judgment that the kingdom of Babylon would be delivered over to the Medes and Persians. So, bam, bam, bam. Daniel points out to Belshazzar, you're about to lose your kingdom, you're about to lose your life, and the whole kingdom's going to be subject to someone else, just like the Jewish nation has been subject to you for these, whatever it was, 70 years or whatever. Both Nebuchadnezzar and Belshazzar worshiped the gods, little g, of Babylon. They worshiped idols. Idols that they had created or had paid somebody to create. But either way, they were created by the hands of man. I've already mentioned, Nebuchadnezzar paid lip service to the power of God more than once, but he never changed his ways. I read to you the verse where he said God's the creator, God's in control. But he never changed his life. It never convicted him enough to follow God, and Belshazzar was worse. Now, idols. Do what? It does seem to be a cycle, and we talk about the cliches, power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. It seems that mankind just has that weakness, that we do see it repeat itself again and again and again. And we have to be careful not to be sucked into that, should we ever get that kind of power or that. But even little things, can lead us astray. Which brings me back to idols. Idols, we know that idols, just by definition, are human creations. So it follows that idol worship is self-worship. Somehow, we'll jump in the car to go somewhere, and I jump behind the wheel and drive, and Susan will talk about how I've got control issues. Well, that's the way we are. We want to be in control. We want to be in charge. So people create these idols, and somehow then they turn around and worship this piece of wood or a piece of metal or whatever. Which doesn't make much sense. We do the same thing today with our priorities if we get them wrong. We do the same thing today if we worship physical things, want to spend more time with physical things than we do God. That type deal. The kings exalted themselves. They thought that they were subject to no one. They thought they were absolutely in control, that nobody could question whatever they did. And for a while, it was one of those self-fulfilling prophecies. If they were brutal enough, and they were, that they would kill off their enemies, then for a while they had control until God stepped in and showed them who really was in control. Again, God reminded them that He causes kings to rise and fall according to His will. To finish up, as long as man thinks he's in control, as long as we let ourselves believe that we're here because of our wisdom, we're here because of our hard work, we have this success because we've done smarter than the next guy, and we don't give credit to God the way we should, that's a problem. If we think that we're masters of life and death, idolatry is not dead, because that's what these people in the Old Testament thought. We see example after example of them thinking their lives were because of them, that they were in control. But gods, again, God with a little g, but gods of wood and stone, gold and silver, are and always have been useless figments of people's imagination. You know, we hear all the time about the lady who thinks she sees the face of Jesus in a piece of toast, or things like that have become religious artifacts just because enough people decided that reminds me of God in some way. We have to be careful with that. Our priority should always be serving and obeying God. The big thing we need to get out of today's lesson: God always is in control. He created the universe, and He still controls the universe. I guess that's my answer to all this talk about global warming. Now, we may be killing the earth, but if God wants the earth to stay around, He's going to make it happen. If the other side to that is, if God decides tomorrow that He's ready to end this thing completely, there isn't anything I can do about it anyway. He's in control, and that's the way we have to go into worshiping and serving and following Him. If you can't admit that you're in subjection to a higher power, how are you ever going to serve them anyway? That's why I keep going back to this idol thing. I just don't understand people that carve on a piece of wood and then turn around and worship it. They created it. They know where it came from. But still, we see it over and over and over again. And I just have to wonder if we do destroy it, maybe that was God's plan all along anyway. I don't know. But anyhow, that's neither here nor there. That's not part of this lesson. I appreciate your attention. I appreciate you being here. And appreciate the comments.